Hi. I'm reminded of a scene in West Wing where the president, which is, of course, what every liberal wants to believe that the White House is really like, and the president is about to make a speech, and he's nervous. And so his wife comes up and cuts his tie off. And that gets him all scared, and they put his tie on, and he's great, because he has to ad-lib. That is what working with Joan is like. Because what happens is she says, well, you can come. What do you want to talk about? So I said, well, I'll talk about moral courage, because I know that, and I have lots of pictures. And she says, well, do we have a projector? Do you want that? I said, sure. So I spent 3 days putting up pictures on a projector. And then she says, well, there's no room for the projector, so you can't use it. I'd say, okay, I won't use the projector. And then she says, yeah, but don't just talk about your story, talk about your life and where you came through and what Ted Koppel was like and everything else. So consequently, I'm here and I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. You guys, many of you may be furloughed. I prefer to think of it as being unemployed, and my career has been that I spent 20 years in the first job at ABC, and the next 20, I've had over 20 jobs. And right now, I don't have one. So I'm writing books. Just for reference, oddly enough, this is a book about a motorcycle courier in 1973 carrying news film that just happens to prove that Richard Nixon took money from the South Vietnamese to extend the war and cause the deaths of 20,000 soldiers. And for that, they want to kill him. Unfortunately, it's not out till May, but I expect you all to keep looking for it. I'm going to, a lot of this other stuff is, I'm going to talk about a documentary that I wrote, and it was finished and aired in April this year on PBS, called Rescuing the Philippines. And it is a story of, I forgot all my notes, there they are, moral courage. And moral courage is when you decide and then act, which is kind of important, to help someone when they don't know you, you don't know them, when everybody else is telling you, sometimes threatening you, sometimes threatening to kill you or jail you for helping this person. And you're going to get nothing out of it, and you do it anyway. I seem to be in the mainstream. I just found out yesterday that there's a New York University chair of moral courage, which strikes me as sort of odd, and a very nice Muslim woman from Canada who seems to run it. This story, and the other thing is, I decided I wore a coat and tie and suit and everything else for 40 years, because otherwise nobody was going to listen to a jumped up courier. So I decided I wanted to find a job where I could wear Hawaiian shirts and work. And over the strong advice of my wife, Ann over here, I wore it anyway. I'm going to just sort of start throwing stuff at you, and if you could just sort of pass them around. The story in the Philippines begins in the mid-30s. There were, I keep finding all my little tchotchkes, and you thought you were going to stop me from showing my pictures. The Philippines were an American colony. There was about a 5-year period between 1895 and 1900 when Americans, for some unknown reason, decided they wanted to be an imperial nation. They immediately decided they didn't want any of these people, and they're still stuck with the Puerto Ricans and the Hawaiians, but they gave everybody else back. I mean, as somebody said, Jack Netzorg, who was a historian of the Philippines, said they weren't given independence, they were kicked out. In 1935, they started the process, which had been signed by FDR, of becoming independent. And the first thing they did was they elected Manuel Quezon, the first president. This is Manuel Quezon at about age 17, when he was fighting against the Americans. There was a rebellion, and he fought against the Americans. And this is Manuel Quezon in 1935, as he is being inaugurated first president of the Commonwealth of the Philippines, which was kind of independent. And this is my favorite picture because this is a life. This is Manuel Quezon on this yacht in about 1938. One of the nice things about that story is that when he surrendered to the Americans, when the rebellion was over, he gave, all he had left was a dagger, and he gave that to a U.S. military man who returned it to him in 1935 when he was made president. And it may be hard to believe, but Americans and Filipinos got along quite well, as far as I can see. Filipinos and Filipinos didn't always get along well. There were rebellions and whatever, but Americans and Filipinos, it was a mixed society, and a very American society. Manuel Quezon, the opportunity occurred when this man, who is described by Colliers as a dried-out Barrymore, Paul Voorhees McNutt, who is one of the more famous people you've never heard of. He was the governor of Indiana. He wanted to be president in 1940. Well, FDR took care of that. And because he wanted to be president in 1940, FDR in 1937 sent him to the Philippines because he couldn't find anyplace else further away. He was sworn in, and you'll notice Quezon sitting in the background checking on him. And he and Quezon had some troubles. They did not get along. What they did get along over was poker. They played poker incessantly. So much so that, it'll come up. So much so that McNutt had his own handmade mother of pearl poker chips. Now, they were joined by another young man. In the silly hat, behind General MacArthur in the silly hat, is Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower, who actually put himself through West Point playing poker, and eventually had to stop playing with junior officers because he was taking all their money. There was so that's the U.S. High Commissioner, the most powerful American in the Philippines, the President of the Philippines, the most powerful Filipino in the Philippines, and then a bunch of guys who sold 2 for a nickel cigars. And these are some of the cigars they sold. Tiona I like because it was named after a town in Pennsylvania. And Chavanessa because it's the cutest. And the best place to get cheap tobacco was the Philippines. So these are the Frieder brothers, the 5 sons of Sam Frieder, who came from Hungary, 1860, and opened a cigar factory on 45th Street in New York City. Now, it's hard to believe, but most of the cigar factories were in New York City, and none of it came from Cuba. Cuban tobacco was a brand of tobacco. And I'm not going to tell you the names. It's Morris and Phil and Herbert and somebody else, but I can't identify them. When they became the largest, they went from 1919 was the first time they went to the Philippines. By 1935, they had 10 factories, 4,500 employees, and they were the largest importer of cigars to the United States. And this took wandering around like this to try to see where your fields were. If you can't see this, They're on a hand-poled raft in a Model T. Now, you've sort of got you've got the main players. There was a Jewish community of about maybe 150 to 200 people, depending on who you hear, listen to, in the Philippines. They know that, I love this little fact, they know that Jews lived in the Philippines as far back as the 1500s. And how do they know this? Because two of them were sent to Mexico City to be put to the Inquisition and had an auto da fe, which is being burned alive. So that must have cheered them up. This was Temple Emil, which was the only synagogue. It served everybody and anybody who wanted to show up, regardless of how they did things. Okay, the way that this worked was that by 1937, most people did not believe that Hitler was what we know him now to be. They just thought it was a bad guy. And there were concentration camps, but they were work camps. As a matter of fact, most concentration camps were work camps. There were 5,000 work camps in Germany and occupied countries at the end of the war, maybe a dozen death camps. They didn't care if you died at the work camps, but they weren't specifically set up that way. But at that point, 37, 38, up until 1942, when Hitler invaded Poland, they and the Einsatzgruppen started killing tens of thousands of Polish Jews. They weren't killing Jews. So, you know, the international community sort of said, well, you know, it's not so bad. Well, in 1938, November, there was Kristallnacht, where over 1,000 synagogues were burned, Jewish stores were broken. It was called Kristallnacht because the broken glass was gleaming on the streets like crystal. And it's interesting because I did the video research on this. There are no films of this. There are barely any photos. And there are no films except for this one that was done by one of the American companies, which is a complete fake. I mean, you can see the guys, you know, supposed to be the Nazis going off making jokes with these guys who are supposed to be Jews. Because the Nazis weren't going to let anybody in. I mean, they didn't let anybody film it. They weren't stupid. Well, they were. But. Now, most nations at that point did nothing. Chaim Weizmann said the nations of the world were divided into two parts. The countries that Jews could not live in and the countries that they could not enter. So the McNutt, and there's 4 different stories on this. I mean, one of the nice things about this story is it's very complex and you can't find out what's going on because everyone's dead. McNutt came back from a visit to New York and he had talked to the Joint Distribution Committee, which is called Joint because they wouldn't have to say Jewish. And a guy there named Julius Weiss suggested an agricultural project for the Jews in the Philippines. And he came back and sort of said, not a bad idea. And then something really odd happened that I just adore. This is a wire copy from the Jewish Telegraph Agency, September 1937. German consul in Shanghai aids Jewish refugees. Now you got to remember, this is what's cool about this story is that everybody is 3,000 miles, 4,000 miles away from the Home Office. They didn't care. I mean, they were doing what they wanted to do. The Nazis in the Philippines were the most inefficient Nazis you've ever seen. The Americans did whatever the hell they wanted to. So what actually happened here was that, and nobody could believe this when I told them about it, was that the Japanese and were busy slaughtering the Chinese, There really is no other way to put that. And they managed to throw a couple of shells into Shanghai, which some of you may or may not remember, actually didn't belong to China, but belonged to the international Germans and the French and the British and the Americans, who had sort of carved out a trading zone originally to sell opium, and then later they sold opium to China in order to buy tea and sell it back to India. A very lucrative trade. So 28 Jews. Actually, there's some, I'm a weird guy, but I spent a very happy day in the files room of the JDC. Why I was happy, I have no idea. And there are a series of notes there where the chairman is saying, why in God's name are we supposed to help the Jews in Shanghai? The richest people in the world are Jews in Shanghai, because they were the original Harbin Jews that had been the other end of the Silk Road. And we're talking about the Kaduris and the Sassoons and the people that own the Mandarin hotels now, and billions and billions. And he kept saying, why are we helping them? We don't need to help them. As it turned out, Kaduri had all his funds tied up. The Germans had frozen his funds. He didn't have any. But he was embarrassed because he couldn't take care of his own people, so he didn't ask for help. So the Germans decided to pull their own people out, all the German citizens. I don't mind. And for some reason, now it could have been just because they didn't care, these were guys who were not Nazis. I mean, I really honestly don't think they were. They also sent a message to all the German Jews. Now, German Jews were identified with a specific passport that had a huge red. Oh, did I already sent it around? I must have missed it. Okay, had a big red J on it. Why would you think that there was a big red J on that passport? You think the Nazis did it? No. The Swiss did it because they didn't want any Jews to come over and compete. They didn't want them to come out of Germany and compete for jobs. Anyway, they were officially stateless. They had a big J on their passports. They couldn't get out. Germans put them on the ship, the Gneisenau, named after a German naval hero, and shipped them to Manila. When they left, an entire squad of the SA, the sort of lesser awful German Nazi troops, came down and made sure they got on the boat safely. When they had a transship stop in Kobe, Japan, they came back to their staterooms and found that there was a very nice fruit basket decorated with Hitler's colors, which they said some of them, most of them threw overboard. And then they got to Manila. And the German consul in Manila went to McNutt and arranged for visas for these people to enter. Now, this is boring, but the problem right now is that the Philippines are kind of independent and kind of not. Okay? So the US has very strict immigration laws, not as a result of anti-Semitism, which was what most people think, but as a result of the fact they were in a recession and they didn't want anybody to come in. Even David Wyman of Paper Walls says that. But they hadn't passed that law in the Philippines yet. So the Philippines were sort of open territory, and McNutt figured out that one of the few things he could do was issue visas. So even before Kristallnacht, they had contacted the, these are all out of order. Oh my God. They had contacted the official, there were Jewish agencies still operating in Germany and still trying to get people out. And they put ads in the paper, like this one, which, if you can read really blurry German, says, we have a job for a cigar maker in the Philippines, if you can speak English. But ads like this started appearing. There was a long list, which is probably already going around because I can't find it, of professions that were required. And then what went out were telegrams like this. This is from Rabbi Schwartz, who had just immigrated to the Philippines, to Cantor Seisner, who was a major figure during the Japanese occupation, saying, got a job for you, doesn't pay much, but there's some chance for extra work. And, by the way, you can get out of Germany. If you had something like this, they let you out. Now, Seisner was in a particularly awful situation in that they had, oh God, they had thrown him out of Poland and sent him to Germany. Germany said, yeah, you're not coming in here. And then they went back to Poland, and the Poland said, we're not letting you in. So there were thousands, tens of thousands of Jews living in about a 1-mile strip between the two countries. And that's where Seisner was. In essence, he waved that little invitation and was able to get out. Now oh, here it is. This is what, they went to the committee. Now the Frieders, remember the cigar people, this is where they come back in. The Frieders were not the richest. The richest guy in the Philippines was a Jew who was a Mason and was married to a Catholic, and his wife was the person who did money up for the temple. Just to show you that, I mean, the world changes. They went to the Frieders, who'd formed the committee, and said, well, who do we need? And the problem was, and this comes up as a real crisis later, the problem is that both the Americans and the Philippines did not want destitute immigrants. Apparently the White Russians, people who lost the war with the communists, had showed up in the Philippines and were still living on the streets 15 years later. They were furious about that. The Americans were furious about that. So what the Jewish Committee did was attempt to find people who were young, who had money, who had skill, and who could take care of themselves. As one of the Frieders said in a report later to the committee, it's stunning how many people lie about that sort of thing. Most of them were coming through broke. The first time that November 1937 was Kristallnacht had already started, and the first time the U.S. government finds out about it is a really nice little telegram that goes to the U.S. High Commissioner saying, have been informally advised emergency entry into the Philippines of several hundred Jewish refugees from Europe being arranged. Please radio all information available, which I think translates as, now the response from McNutt is approximately 40 families have already arrived and we're inviting another 100. So, and at that point, immediately after Kristallnacht, Quezon and a good deal of the Philippines came out and said, they can come here. We don't mind. And they actually were talking about the island of Mindanao, which was largely undeveloped, which is a good place to put urban Jews from Europe. And was also filled with Muslims, and Quezon, not being a fool, thought maybe if I put 1 million Jews in there, it'll kind of even things out. They were going to open that up for colonization. They were talking about 5,000 Jews a year, families, maybe 30,000 total, maybe as many as 1 million total. I mean, it could have made a huge difference. It didn't happen, but it wasn't for lack of trying. This is a page. You know, as a geek like me, one of the great things is they started taking photographs. It's not just microfiche. You now get photos of the original carbon copies with all the notes and everything else on them in color. I mean, that's a list of what ended up happening was that the Filipinos didn't really want to deal with this. And the State Department decided not to go to war with McNutt, who was quite willing to go to war, although it was not going to do him any good. Anti-Semitism was very strong in the United States, just as an example, and as an example of the grotesque lack of moral courage. In Hollywood, and I'm not going to say it's Jewish control, but all the major studio owners happen to be Jewish. They were so cowed by the censorship code, they did not mention Jews for 10 years before the war. Didn't mention them, didn't talk about Nazis, didn't talk about concentration camps, didn't talk about abuse, nothing. And they were all Jewish executives who felt that, you know, I mean, you just can't do anything. I mean, yeah, they're being, you know, starved to death and put up in camps, but what can we do about it? I mean, in case you think that moral courage is something easy, especially when you're not Schindler and sitting there under threat of death, you take an example like that, which was in last week's New Yorker, and you go, yeah, not everybody did this. This was not something simple. One of the, I think, marvelous stories, and I'm only going to tell one, he says, he's lying, is that of the Miodowskis. And Martha Miodowski was the only person that the only original person that we interviewed. She was 103, and I don't know what we did to her, but she died a year later, a week later. She was an Aryan German, married to a Jew. It wasn't that big a deal in the 30s. And they had a little girl. On Kristallnacht, her husband was picked up, taken to Sachsenhausen, which was the first of the big concentration camps, almost in the middle of Berlin. So she gets dressed up, fixes her hair, gets in a taxi cab, and drives to the concentration camp. Walks right in, and she says, I was a good German girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes. I look. Went in there, asked for the commandant, and demanded her husband back. And astonishingly enough, they gave him back. This is Martha, who looks tough here, and this is her husband. This is their daughter, Uschi, or Ursula. When she was in the process of this negotiation, one of the German soldiers, commanders, officers, said, you could stay here. You're German. We'll just annul your marriage. We'll kill your husband. But we'll annul your marriage. You'll be fine. And she said, really? What about my daughter? She's a Mishan. I'm not Jewish, which is mixed. And they said, well, yeah, she'll probably get killed. And so she said, nope, we're out of here. That was one of the toughest women you have ever seen. We're all going out together. We're leaving. And that was because he got a letter saying that he had a visa waiting for him to go to the Philippines. And when we interviewed her daughter was sitting there beside her. I mean, she was also tough because her husband took off for the United States without her, and she never forgave him for that. Eventually, this was in 1940, they actually, Kazan actually donated a portion of his estate, Marikina, and they built a house. They had 6 group houses for Jews. They had jobs for Jews. They were loaning people as much as $1 million a year. The 6 Jewish families who had any money in the Philippines were tithing as much as $40,000 a month in today's money, just to keep these people going. And they did. They got them off the street. Nobody got mad. And this is a celebration at the Frieder's small, modest, incredibly palatial estate. And you can sort of get an idea of how many Jews there were that got out. And this is the proud people at Marikina, Manuel Kazan and Herbert and Phil Frieder. And I used to know all their names by heart and be able to recognize them, and now I can't. It's been a while. it was interesting in that it's portrayed that Marikina was the high point, the big success. That tells me that I have to shut up. What was actually happening was that the United States and the Philippines government both threw their hands up and gave the decision-making process of who would live and who would die to a private committee, the Jewish Refugee Committee of Manila. And they made choices. And they made choices. There are people, probably quite a few people, who came in without money and found jobs in places and whatever. But with great pride, and this is something that was covered up in 1940, the minute it walked in the door at the JDC, they said, let's take that line out. He said his proudest accomplishment were the thousands of old people who would never have been able to support themselves and would have become, what do they call it? Paupers. I mean, they would have become liabilities to society. Now, that sounds cruel and wrong, but there were two things going on still in 1940, 41, 42. Hitler had not started killing people. I mean, he's killing them by accident, but I mean, you know, starving them to death, whatever. But he wasn't, Dachau, Auschwitz, Dachau wasn't a death. Auschwitz, Birkenau, the real killing machines were not in operation. So people could still, they were having meetings. They had a meeting and they said, you know, apparently they said something has to be done. And so all the nations in the meeting went home and did the only thing they could think of, which was completely block Jews from getting in. The Philippines and, oddly enough, Dominican Republic, both put up land for an agricultural reserve. Now, admittedly, the nice thing about this also is that the local papers are all American in Manila at this time, and they acted like Americans. They're really no mercy. And they quoted Quezon at the celebration of Marikina as saying, if they can't make anything grow here, what the hell am I giving them 10,000 acres in Mindanao for? But these were not kibbutzim. These were watchmakers and, you know, pharmaceutical salesmen and other people from Europe. This went on. Now, there's a second part of the story that doesn't really have to do with the Jews, but I can't not tell it. There are two stories here that I think are undercovered and nobody's really paid attention to, not sufficient. One is that 1,300 Jews, Jewish families, also non-Jews, people married to Jews, people whose grandparents were Jews, and Protestant and Catholics, all came to Manila and got visas, were legally allowed to live there, and meant the war was over, went to the United States. The other story that I would bet, I'm not going to ask for hands, but I'm just going to bet, that very few of you know is that the worst battle for civilian deaths in World War II was Warsaw, where the Russian army sat outside the city for 2 months and let the Jews and the Germans shoot each other because they wanted neither of them to live. The second worst, with 100,000 civilian casualties, was Manila. And almost nobody realizes that. And Manila was flattened. This only gives you a vague idea of what it looked like. It was flattened because MacArthur was a moron and decided that he had to keep his promise that he would be back. He could have circumvented the place. The Japanese army commander had actually ordered everyone out because Manila was undefendable. And a Navy commander was given orders by the Naval High Command to hold the city until the last man and to kill every non-Japanese in it. And we are talking about bayoneting babies and not hyperbole. Really, I mean, these guys who we interviewed or 4 or 5, spent 4 days lying in a ditch next to a dead woman, watched the neighbor's family being killed. I mean, these are not, hyperbole, made up stories. It was a brutal, horrible battle, and the Japanese fought to the last man. I mean, there's a scene in the videos, which I didn't bring, where they're actually fighting in the baseball stadium. The Japanese are dug in behind the concrete, bleachers, and the tanks are on the pitcher's mound. I mean, it's the most surreal thing you've ever seen. It lasted for over a month, and the Japanese, oddly enough, again, this is being so far away, oddly enough, did not care if they were Jewish. They'd look at the passport and say, oh, you're German, you're okay. You're on our side. Or they'd look at the passport and say, Austrian, you're okay. Americans, Australians, Britons, French, anybody else, they went into Santo Tomas and were generally starved to death. But Jews were allowed to starve to death outside in the main city. It was a horrible, horrible period of time. There's a woman, Olga Zervalakis, I got that right, who I love and who has given me permission to write books about her father, who was a private investigator before the war. And her diary entry for one day was, I didn't die today. And the stories of how these people escaped, I mean, drenched in gasoline with the building set on fire, and the Filipino nanny pulled them out, Of course, there's also the sort of good parts is that at one point they were talking about the family was hiding they're under some corrugated iron, and they heard footsteps come up, and the woman who was telling us was a baby, and was a baby. She's not now. And they couldn't stop her from crying, and they're thinking, oh my God, we've been discovered, we're all going to get killed. It was the baby, and then this voice comes in and says, anyone got a Chesterfield? So the Americans did come through, but the city burned for a week, a solid week. Almost all of, and they had to blow their way through the old Spanish forts. Almost all of Manila is new. Okay, and then there were some cool things. I'm sorry, I got a bad impression of what's cool. And I'm going to get this wrong, because I always do, February of 1945, 2 days after the Japanese had officially been beaten out of Manila, but were actually still fighting, they brought all the Jews together and all the Jewish soldiers and celebrated Passover. And they had blown up that picture, the nice picture of the thing. That was used as a storage place for major bombs, and the Japanese blew it up. So they went and had it at the race course, the San Lazaro race course. And actually what was cool with that was that we have another picture of the boy who asked the questions, and we interviewed him. He's now about 75, which was kind of neat. Later in that year, after the war was over, Cantor Cisner and the rest of them celebrated, and somebody's going to have to, it says Kol Nidra on here, but I believe it's Rosh Hashanah, and somebody can correct me. Yom Kippur. And it was over 4,000 people, and may still be the largest such celebration, and they had that in the baseballs. Actually, I was told by a bunch of people from Manila this was the basketball stadium. Either way, they're all named after the local hero, Rizal. And I just thought, I mean, there's some descriptions of that where the Jewish kids say, to see American soldiers coming in, Jewish soldiers, and they're big, and they're strong, and they have guns, and they're not trying to kill us, was just this immense impression. I mean, these are some of the most patriotic people you will ever see. I've left out, I'm going to shut up because I think my time's up, and I've left out tons. It's a wonderful story. Please read. It happened because of this book, Escape to Manila, And this happened because Frank Ephraim retired, went to the U.S. Holocaust Museum and said, I want to interview some people. And then said, well, where is the documents for the Philippines? And they said, well, nobody went to the Philippines. He said, excuse me, I did. So he went out, did the research, and wrote the book. And that did not happen until 2005. These people, especially the Frieders, who had arranged it and run it and paid for it and everything else, never spoke of it. Their children had no idea that this had happened. Eisenhower never wrote of it except for one thing, which was they offered him what would now be $1 million a year to run this effort, $60,000 back then, to run this effort, and he decided to go off to Europe anyway, because he was tired of MacArthur, mainly. Kazan sort of barely mentioned it. I think one of the, I haven't got a big ringing final statement, but I think one of the facts of real moral courage is that you do it because you have to. You just don't, I mean, you stand there and you go, well, how can I not do this? Yeah, I'm a tobacco salesman. It's not going to do me any good. Jews don't buy cigars particularly. I'm trying to run for president. It's not going to do me any good with the Ku Klux Klan practically having its own party in the 1930s, and the Nazi Bund, and Joe Kennedy, and Lindbergh, and everybody else. And your Manuel Kazan, who is resisted by the physicians union that doesn't want the Jewish physicians to come in, and the real hero of the revolution. This was all done because these people could not do it. And they didn't think they were special, and they didn't think they were a big deal. But I think you'd have to say that they were. I would. And that's that. So, now, I am willing to stay here and talk, as you might imagine, as you probably have gathered, until hell freezes over. I have 69 gigabytes worth of data over here. I have a small amount of material here. I can also tell you about the other story that I never even got to, which is A Debt to Honor, which is the rescue of Italian Jews, where Italy never moved its Jews to Germany until Italy actually surrendered to the United States in the southern part. Germans took over the northern part, put Mussolini back in charge, and said, send us all your Jews. Well, there were 35,000 Jews in Italy at that point. 3,000 were all that was sent to the camps. French sent everybody they could find, but the Italians did not. And what's fun about that documentary, which was the first one I did with Cy Rotter, is just, I mean, they're just such normal people. These, you know, this woman's a farm woman standing in her yard, and these man and woman walk down the street, and they say, can you hide us? And she says, sure. And she hides them for 4 years. A nanny, both the parents got taken away to the camps. She's got these 3 kids. Let me tell you, this was the hardest ass woman I've ever seen. And she doesn't want the kids. She tries to put them up for adoption. The guy says, no, don't put them there, they're just going to take them. So that's okay. She hitchhikes across Italy to her mother's place in like everything from ambulances to German trucks, and raises all 3 of these kids herself. I mean, this is somebody who was just hired. Didn't know these people that much. And she says, nobody knew they were Jewish because I didn't tell anybody. I don't think she told anybody anything. But the kids stayed alive. I mean, it's also a bit of a, I mean, it's a sad story, but it's also a bit of a joyous story in that so many people, nuns, priests, underground movements in Assisi, underground movements in other northern cities, you know, worked to move the Jews around, to keep them going. They carved out stamps by themselves, by hand. And they managed to save 80% or 10 or 90%. Which,
do you want to see if we have a few questions?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Maybe there'll be some time for a few more stories.
Oh, one more thing. Can I do one more thing? Oh, please. Please. Herbert Zipper, who was Hepton Dachau, and actually composed the Dachau Symphony, which is one of the most haunting pieces of music you will ever see. Got a visa to the Manila, became the conductor of the Manila Symphony, and he refused to play for the Japanese. And that's a ticket, that's an original ticket, to, you can find anything on eBay, to the first performance where he played the Eroica, and I've lost a picture, but I probably handed it out somewhere, in a church with absolutely no roof. And 50% of the orchestra was dead. They had 13-year-olds playing, and it was packed. And that's, again, the sort of life part of this. I mean, there was an element of real joy at the end. And that's it. Okay, I'll shut up. Questions? Yes?
How did you get to this story?
I was hired. Well, the first one, the Italian one, Cy came in, and Cy Rotter is one of the world's masters at getting things for free. And he'd gotten the Italian television to shoot it for free, and he got Alan Alda to record it for free, and I was the only person who said, Cy, I love you dearly, but I got no money, and my family can't eat, so you have to pay me. So I've actually done, I've done two for him. I rewrote another one about the Balkans. And the second one, the one about the Philippines, I was working for a company out in Frederick. I am not a struggling young documentarian, because struggling young documentarians become struggling old documentarians, and they still don't have the money. I was hired by a company, and I spent 18 months while I wasn't writing Rick Edelman's Truth About Money, which is all the things I should have done with my money in my life. Studying this and researching it and finding, it's just fascinating. I mean, it's just, one of the things that's happening is, and eBay is sort of a fluctuating mirror of the times, is that the guys who were in World War II are dying. And so there are masses of Signal Corps photos. In 1945, when they went in there, man, there must have been a cameraman for every third soldier. There was I spent a month finding an entire movie in color, done in color. And I just had a ball. And it was such a complicated story with the Germans in and out, and the Nazis in and out, and these Americans, this and that, and the Kazan sort of like changing his mind and being a total politician, that I fell in love with it.
I heard on the news this week that a lot of German women were involved in the killing of the Jews. Did you find that in your research? I was pretty surprised that women.
I got to tell you, I don't think they had time. I mean, they may have been dragooned into the death troops. I can't remember the name of it. But at that point, first off, you couldn't tell if they were men or women. And second, because they were starved to death. But I did not, and nor would I expect to. There were a huge number of Jews in Germany and Austria who had been through this over and over and over again. And in World War, I'm going to wipe my face because I'm old and hot. In World War I, one of the great failures of World War I, Jews were part of the army. Jews were part of the society. Jews married Aryans. They were but they were basically Germans. 1933, Hitler comes in. They're not Germans anymore. I mean, a number of people told us stories about their parents and their grandparents. they came in, they burned all this one girl's father's books, and he went out and threw all his medals from World War I into the fire. Another story about their grandparents who wouldn't leave, who said, we're Germans, it'll blow over. I mean, that was, when I was saying that nobody did anything, one of the parts of this is that, the Germans are beating up the Jews. Yeah, they do it all the time. Really, I mean, I'm not sort of kidding, but nobody, and I read, a lot of State Department and historical, nobody thought that Hitler was going to do what he did. That was absolutely, it started in 42 in the middle of the war, and Eisenhower had to go to Ohrdruf and witness. Ohrdruf was one of the work camps. And he ordered all his major commanders to go as well, because nobody believed it. I mean, there's all this stuff, there's a sort of mythology that the Americans did not take in any Jewish refugees. They took in 250,000 refugees, which doubled the amount of the second largest influx, which was Israel. Americans took in a lot of Jewish refugees. They could have taken in 30, 40, 50, maybe 100,000 more if they hadn't tightened up. But nobody thought that this madman was going to do what he did. At least that's my impression.
So I asked the People magazine quality question, which is, of all the news people you worked with, tell us some of your experiences with them.
Well, Don Imus, just because you stop drinking doesn't mean you're not a drunk. And it also really doesn't mean that you're not a jerk. However, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I worked for him for 3 years. We never spoke to each other. My mother was an alcoholic, and I had a hard time with him. So we never spoke to each other, but he was a brilliant interviewer, very funny. And if I'd have been sitting there, he would have never said nappy-headed host, because I'd have knocked him off the air. However, at that point, he had a guy who was black who was his executive producer, because I'd left, and he was probably asleep. Ted Koppel was the smartest human being I've ever met. He was also the hardest to work for. I worked for him for 8.5 years. By the time I was done, I was the last man standing. I mean, I started out with a core of field producers, 8 or 9 of us, and they were, for one thing, I would walk in every day and say, I'm the dumbest guy in the room, because these guys were great. They all burned out. And I finally burned out. We did South Africa when Mandela was released, and we bounced in there with 5 people. You can't do a TV show with 5 people. So they were hiring literally people off the streets. And we did great coverage, but I edited for 72 straight hours, straight, no sleep. My PA went out to get hamburgers, and the guy tried to hold him up at knife point, and he was such a bad mood, he picked the guy up, threw him down on his head. Artist was a big guy. I mean, it was, and after that, I burned out badly. But it wasn't Ted's fault. Ted just always thought that you could do more than you had done. If you could do a day in the life of a candidate and cover him with 6 crews and 2 airplanes, which is what I did, and edit it in an hour. And then you could do 2 candidates in New York City and cover it with 19 crews and finish it with an interview done at 10:30 and go on the air at 11:30. I mean, he had no limit to the amount of things he would ask for, which was, I mean, I'm never going to do better work than that, ever. But I can't do that now. I'm too old. I was 30. I walked in there, I was 30 years old, and I walked out, I was about 70. Other people. I did work Fox. Roger Ailes is one of the evilest human beings in the world. I was operations producer, and when I signed on, Joe Perrinan from CBS was going to run Fox. And when I got there, it was Roger Ailes who met me and clearly, I knew, decided to fire me. They waited until and this was before Fox News, this was Fox Network. They waited until we'd completed their very first Republican and Democratic National Conventions, in which I placed 12 cameras built for, where do you put cameras when they do an interview? 4 scenes, 4 sets, including one on the floor, in 4 hours. And the next day they said, you're fired. We were going to tell you yesterday, but we didn't want to affect your work. I said, yeah, that could have happened. Sadly, Roger Ailes is also the smartest person in television today, which may or may not go together all the time. Other people in television, my wife has begged me not to talk about John King, but I will suffice it to say that he's a walking Ebola virus, and I hope he gets leprosy. And when he screwed it up massively in Boston, I not only jumped up and down, I had a web page up within 30 seconds. Just, by the way, to sort of keep my introduction going, I never get to say enough. I am, the last year, to my wife's also great dismay, I have been trying to make a living as an author. As an author, I write books, sort of. I have 3 books up on Amazon that sell maybe one a day, maybe one a month, including The Unemployed Guy's Guide to Unemployment, in case any of you furloughed people want to check that out. I'm hoping that this book sells like crazy and gets a movie deal, otherwise we're dead. But I really wanted to, I like it. I sit in my office wearing Hawaiian shirt and put my headphones on and disappear, which my wife also hates. But I can write, and quite happily. It's a lot of fun. I'm not sure that it's going to make me any money. Anybody else?